Okay, well, welcome to chapter 4. We are continuing in our journey. We're probably looking at, I would say, the cognitive development in the first 3 or 4 years. You look in your textbook, there's a lot on this in this chapter, on Piaget. Piaget's saying, talking about probably the first 7 years, these first two stages of Piaget. We'll get to those in a sec, but I want to remind you that all of what you're reading is subject to effects of different cultures and different cohorts. So when you read a theory and the theory says at this age we would expect children, that's not necessarily so, because under different circumstances we might find that children are going to develop a little sooner, just through exposure. I mean, in our society, we expose children to all kinds of things because of computers and TVs and all that kind of thing. We probably talk to kids a lot more too. So we have cognitive development today in this chapter. First of all, probably a good place to start with any kind of cognitive development is with the stages. And Piaget is the theorist that thought of the idea of stages. Here's a deal with stages. We want to situate Piaget's theories in a time where a lot of scientists were very interested in evolutionary theory. Now that's not where the world came from or the geological record or whatever, but as far as psychology is concerned, remember the evolutionary perspective is going to be, how do we as people develop? And so we have people in an environment, and we're going to adapt to that environment. That's the basic idea of children's cognitive development, that they're interacting with the world and consequently they're going to adapt to it. So we have idea, what Piaget called a scheme. We have life experiences, and what do? Is we take our ideas, we apply them to life experiences. That causes us to either change the ideas because our experiences don't go with the ideas, or don't change the ideas and just say, well, that's life experience supports what I think. That's called assimilation, when we keep our ideas intact because of our life experiences, and accommodation happens when we have to change our ideas to fit. Piaget said it is when our life experiences really don't jibe so much with what we think, there's so much accommodation that we have to change the general patterns of our thinking, and that leads us from stage to stage. Okay, we start off with a stage called sensory motor thinking. If you think about sensory motor, it combines the senses and movements. Okay, so think about that as thinking is involved with coordinating what we see, hear, sense, and how we move. Okay, and that's what babies do. They see something and they want to touch it or put it in their mouth, or they want to toddle over and pick it up or whatever. And so sensory motor thinking is about that. Eventually that just really doesn't work, though, because we start to think in terms of the future and the past, and remember and react and adapt, and that leads us into pre-operational thinking. Pre-operation is the second stage, and you can go through it in your textbook and learn a lot about it, but basically pre-operation, think about the operation as what we're doing in our minds, and then pre-operation is where we're learning to use our minds. You may say, well, I don't use my mind, it hurts to use my mind, but that's not true, because if you came in the room to look at your computer, you sat in a chair, then you did mental operations, sit in the chair. You didn't think about whether the chair was going to collapse. You sat in it. Why? because yesterday you sat in the chair and it didn't collapse. So that's an operation. You came in the room, you didn't bring a chair with you because you knew there was a chair there. Okay? You weren't looking into the room to see if there was a chair there. There was a chair there because it was here in your mind. That's mental operation. You can use it. Around about 2 years, children are learning, their second year, they're learning these pre-operations. Okay. We also want to look at thinking not only as stages that we're going through in adaptation, but also think about what do we do when we think. First of all, and I think we've talked about this in last class, in the last chapter, we react. We have reflexes. On top of those reflexes, we're going to start to use our minds to act on the world around us, which involves something called attention. And if you've ever watched babies interact with the world around them, you know they're paying attention. When they don't pay attention anymore, it's probably because they habituate. Habituate means literally you're not paying attention because you already understand that. We'll also see that we focus on the things that we're interested in. We're probably interested in them, at least infants, because we haven't dealt with them before. So there's something new. You also see that children are going to start to learn, okay? They do something, and they get a response, and that might determine whether they do it again. That's called learning, or learning theory, or behaviorism, and they do that. Conditioning. If you had an opportunity to take Psych 200, you might have learned about learning theory. At least as infants, we do that. Around when we're in school, we may apply more thinking than just reacting, but it's there. Okay, we'll also see that children are developing memory. Now, none of us remember the first couple of years of our lives. If you roll back to the last chapter, I think I mentioned that the things that you remember, you probably remember because you had an emotional response to that. And so what we're going to see is we'll start to employ these kinds of reactions, emotional reaction, sensory reaction, where something looks a certain way or sounds a certain way in order to remember the parts of it. Okay. One of the most important things that we're remembering involves our interactions with other people. We mentioned something about self-concept last chapter. In this chapter, we were introduced to this theory by this Russian psychologist, Lev Vygotsky. And Vygotsky says most of our cognitive development is dependent upon our human interactions. And this is where we're learning how to choose the people to pay attention to, and how do we develop a relationship to the point that we're copying them or they model what to do to us. This is essential in talking about language development. A lot of this chapter is language development because language is one of the most essential things that you learn in your life. No one sat you down in a class with worksheets and homework and all that to teach you how to talk. You pick that up because you were born with that desire to learn to communicate. And you did because you were and you are capable of learning like that. So toward that end, with language, we learn it because it's modeled to us. If you had parents or caregivers who never said anything to you, and you just were not exposed to any language, your language skills would be much different from someone who grew up in an environment where people talk to them a lot. Okay. So let's pay attention to that. There's a lot, again, there's a lot in this chapter on language learning, and I think the thing is that you have to understand it really comes by human interaction. But also one of the most important items to learn or to remember is that we probably in some way have start off with some real desire to communicate, and for that reason we're hardwired to pick up sounds and how sounds are used and gestures and facial expressions and all of that kind of stuff. The kind of stuff you see babies paying attention to that. And I do believe it's because communication is essential. Something else. Grammar. Grammar is, we kind of think of grammar as a subject in school, but it's not. Grammar is how do we assemble words together in order to make meaning. We pick up grammar the same way we pick up vocabulary, in the same way we pick up how to say the words in the first place, make the sounds, phonetics. And so we pick that up at home or wherever you are, in daycare or nursery or whatever. You pick everything up from the people who talk to you. So that's why when you get kids to school and they're using poor grammar, it's not because of the teacher's fault, it's with the parents. Why didn't the parents use good grammar? If the parents had used good grammar in the first place, wouldn't have that problem when they got to school. Okay. It's always the parents' fault. It's not always the parents' fault, but anyway. Communication, it's an important thing. Probably originally one of the more essential aspects of cognitive development. Anyway, it's a great chapter, a lot of fun, and hope you enjoy it. I hope you have a good week, and take care of yourselves, and I'll see you for Chapter 5.